The dead have rules. I know this because I've spent my life studying them. But the invitation to a dead man's funeral broke everyone. It didn't arrive by official mail or diplomatic courier. There was no embossed crest from the Holy See, no pontifical seal dripping with crimson wax. It came as a whisper in the machine, a digital ghost transmitted through 3 layers of encryption, appearing on my screen for precisely 90 seconds before it consumed itself in a cascade of deleting code. The message was simple and signed and utterly impossible. An invitation, not to the grand, televised funeral of Cardinal Alistair Finch that the world would see, but to the vero rito, the true rite. My heart stopped. I'd only ever seen that term in one place. The private, condemned letters of a 17th-century historian named Valerius, who claimed that the Vatican's most solemn ceremonies had a hidden layer, an inner sanctum of ritual that predated the Church itself. Valerius was excommunicated for the suggestion. His books were gathered and burned in the Campo de' Fiori. The official story is that he was a heretic trafficking in demonic fantasies. But in the hushed corridors of academia where I work, specializing in the syncretism of early Mediterranean religions, we know the truth. He didn't get it wrong. He got too close. My work has always been a professional curse. I've published papers tracing the echoes of the goddess Isis in the iconography of the Virgin Mary, demonstrating how the mechanics of the Egyptian soul-weighing ceremony were lifted piece by piece for the art of the Last Judgment. I've argued that Christianity didn't conquer paganism. It consumed it. It absorbed its power, hid its symbols in plain sight, and twisted its ancient rituals into holy sacraments. It was work that got my papers relegated to obscure journals, my lectures monitored by the diocese, and my tenure applications quietly, repeatedly denied. I was a professional whisperer of uncomfortable truths, an academic ghost haunting the footnotes of official history. And apparently someone in Rome had been listening very, very closely. The invitation was a test, a lure. It offered no instructions, only a time, a date, and a small, unassuming side entrance to the Vatican, Gate Angelica, a name so archaic it wasn't on any modern map. A gate I knew was used primarily by workmen and the Swiss Guard at the end of their shifts. There was no way to RSVP. The message had already turned to digital ash. To go was an insane risk. To ignore it was impossible. Was it a trap set by the very institution I had dedicated my life to exposing? A cruel, elaborate joke by a rival academic? Or was it real? Was I, the outcast, being invited to see the very thing the Church had spent 2 millennia denying? The thought was a shard of ice in my gut, both terrifying and irresistible. I booked a flight to Rome under my mother's maiden name. I told the university dean I was taking an immediate personal leave for a family emergency, an excuse thin enough to see through but just plausible enough to deflect questions. Every step felt shrouded, clandestine, as if I were already a character in a story I couldn't control. As the plane descended over the Eternal City, the setting sun ignited the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, making it look like a crown of fire. It was a beacon of faith for millions, a symbol of divine order. But I wasn't there for the faith. I was there for the fear. The document you sent spoke of a fear the Vatican never buried, a fear of Egyptian magic. I was beginning to understand. It wasn't just a fear of spells or forgotten gods. It was a fear of memory, a fear that the very foundations of the Church were not built on the Rock of Peter, but on the shifting sands of the Nile. As I walked through the Roman twilight toward that forgotten gate, the ancient stones seeming to watch my every move, I felt a chilling certainty settle over me. I was not a guest. I was a witness, and what I was about to see, I was never meant to survive remembering. The real funeral wasn't for the cardinal. It was for the truth. The world outside doesn't just disappear. It's murdered. The instant the heavy iron gate clicked shut behind me, the vibrant, chaotic symphony of Rome, the Vespas, the chatter, the distant church bells was gone. Not muffled, erased. It was replaced by a silence so absolute, so profound, it felt manufactured. A soundproofed void designed to suffocate truth. The Vatican you know, the one of sweeping colonnades, soaring domes, and sun-drenched marble, is a magnificent theater. But I was no longer in the theater. I had been brought backstage. The Swiss guard who met me didn't wear the theatrical, striped uniform the tourists see. He was dressed in plain, functional black, his face a mask of disciplined indifference, his eyes scanning me with a cold, unnerving precision. He never asked for my name. He simply held up a small, dark device to my face, a scanner that emitted a single, soft beep, a sound of finality. He led me not into the familiar grandeur of the apostolic palace, but down, always down, into the city's underbelly. The corridors were narrow, starkly modern in their lighting but ancient in their construction. Bare bulbs cast a sterile, humming glow on walls of immense, sweating stone, cool and slick to the touch. In the flickering periphery of my vision, I could see symbols faintly etched into the rock, far older than the mortar that held them. They were crosses, but they were wrong. The lines seemed to bend and twist, suggesting other, more ancient shapes. Ankhs? Tridents? Eyes? Couldn't be sure. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of damp earth, a ghost of incense, and something else, a clean, chemical scent of preservation. It was the smell of things kept safe, not just from the ravages of time, but from the contamination of knowledge. There were no other guests, no clergy in flowing robes, just silent men in dark, impeccably tailored suits, stationed at every intersection of the corridors. They weren't guards in the way a soldier is a guard. They didn't stand at attention. They flowed. They watched me pass with a liquid grace, their gazes lingering, analytical, inhumanly patient. They were keepers. The document I'd read mentioned rooms even cardinals cannot enter. I was in the hallways that led to them. This was the Vatican's true immune system, the part that identifies and neutralizes foreign bodies. And I was the virus they had willingly ingested. We passed a sealed archway, a stark contrast to the ancient stone around it. It was heavily reinforced with a modern steel door, the kind you see on a bank vault. For a fleeting second, my eyes caught the inscription carved into the stone lintel above it, almost scrubbed clean by time: Corpus Lux Aeterna, the body of eternal light. The phrase sent a jolt through me. It wasn't biblical. It was alchemical, a Gnostic concept of the soul as a trapped spark of divinity. My guide saw my glance. His pace quickened, his hand subtly gesturing me forward. The message was clear: you are on a path. Do not look at the other doors. He finally led me to a small, stark waiting room containing a single, dark wooden bench. The room was a sterile cube designed for isolation. The only feature was a large, dark painting on the wall opposite me. It depicted the weighing of a soul, a familiar Catholic motif. I saw the Archangel Michael, his wings outstretched, holding the golden scales of judgment. But my breath caught in my throat. The creature on the other side of the scales, the one actually performing the weighing, placing the soul's heart against a single white feather, was not a demon. It was not a cherub. It was a man with the head of a jackal, Anubis, the Egyptian guardian of the dead. Here, in the secret heart of the Vatican, was a perfect, undisguised depiction of a pagan god presiding over a Christian soul. It wasn't hidden in a museum vault. It was a statement, a quiet, terrifying admission. My blood ran cold. This wasn't syncretism. This wasn't a historical artifact. This was a continuation. The ritual I was about to witness wasn't an echo of the past. It was the past, still breathing, still alive in the lungs of the church. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was the sound of a secret that had been kept for 2,000 years. The door opened without a sound. A man in the simple, unadorned cassock of a low-ranking cleric, a Vatican ghost, beckoned me to follow. We walked through another series of corridors, each one older than the last, a journey backward in time. The smooth stone gave way to rough-hewn rock, and a visceral understanding washed over me. We were deep within the Vatican necropolis, the city of the dead that lies beneath the basilica. This was not a tour. This was forbidden territory, the resting place of the first popes, a place of immense, untouchable sanctity. But the path we took veered away from the excavated, well-lit tombs I'd seen in archival photographs. We were going deeper, into the unmapped catacombs where the earth holds its breath. The passage opened into a small, circular chamber that felt older than Rome itself, lit not by electric light but by a dozen flickering oil lamps that cast dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. The air was thick, almost viscous, with the cloying scent of myrrh, cedar, and old stone. A handful of other people were already there, perhaps a dozen in total, standing in a loose circle. These were not the cardinals or bishops I had expected. They were old men, their faces etched with a severity that seemed carved from the rock around them, their eyes holding a reptilian stillness. They wore dark, heavy, hooded robes of a coarse, unidentifiable fabric, devoid of any Christian insignia. This was not a gathering of priests. It was a coven. In the center of the chamber, on a simple stone bier, lay the body of the deceased cardinal. And here was the first true shock, a visual heresy that made the Anubis painting feel like a child's drawing. He was not dressed in the opulent crimson and gold vestments of his office. He was wrapped tightly in simple, unbleached linen, his form stark and minimalist, like a pharaoh prepared for his tomb. The symbols of his earthly power, of his Catholic faith, had been stripped away. He had been made ready for a different kind of sacrament. The ceremony began without a word. There was no organ, no choir, only the soft, conspiratorial hiss of the lamps. A figure, presumably the lead officiant, stepped forward from the circle. He held not a crucifix, not a Bible, but a long, thin rod of dark, polished wood. He raised it slowly and he began to chant. The sound that filled the chamber was the most alien and terrifying thing I have ever heard. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't Greek or Aramaic. It was a procession of guttural whispers and soft, sibilant hisses, a language that felt like it was being dredged up from the bottom of time. The phonetics were vaguely Semitic, but the rhythm, the undulating cadence, was something else entirely. It was incantatory, magical. The document you sent spoke of words that could shape reality. I was hearing them. The other figures in the room responded, their voices overlapping in a low, continuous drone that seemed to make the very air vibrate, a resonant frequency that hummed in my bones. It wasn't a prayer meant to be heard by a God in heaven. It was a vibration designed to do something right here in this room to the body on the bier. The officiant began a slow, deliberate walk around the cardinal. With each step, he would stop and make a gesture, not the sign of the cross, but something more complex, more ancient. He would touch his own forehead, then his lips, then his heart, and then extend his hand towards the deceased, palm open. It was a gesture of transference, of activation. My mind, racing through its academic archive, found a horrifying parallel. The pyramid texts, the oldest known religious writings in the world. They describe a ritual for the dead king, a series of utterances designed to loosen the bonds of the physical body and awaken the Ba, the part of the soul that could travel between worlds. I watched, frozen in a state of academic terror, as the officiant dipped his fingers into a bowl of consecrated oil and leaned over the cardinal's head. He traced a symbol on the linen over the man's forehead. It happened so fast I almost missed it, a fleeting, glistening mark under the lamplight. It wasn't a cross. For a fraction of a second, I saw it with perfect, stomach-churning clarity. An ankh, the Egyptian key of life, drawn on the forehead of a dead prince of the Catholic Church. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. They were speaking a language that had been declared dead for millennia. But in this chamber, beneath the tomb of St. Peter, it had never fallen silent. And in that moment I understood. This wasn't a funeral. It was an initiation, a preparation for a journey the Bible never described. The procession of whispers ended as abruptly as it began, leaving a ringing silence that felt louder than the chant itself. The hooded figures parted like a curtain of shadow, and my guides silently gestured for me to follow them. We moved not toward the exit, but deeper into the earth, through a narrow passage that had been crudely cut through the ancient Roman tufa. The walls were so close I could feel their cold, damp breath on both of my shoulders. This wasn't an original feature of the necropolis. This was a secret artery, carved to connect one world to another. The passage opened into a place that should not exist. It was a small, perfectly square chamber, a geometric impossibility nestled within the winding chaos of the Roman catacombs. The walls were not brick or crumbling stone, but seamless, polished black basalt that seemed to drink the light from our oil lamps, creating a darkness that was velvety and absolute. And they were covered, from floor to ceiling, in hieroglyphs. Not faded, half-erased carvings, but pristine, sharp inscriptions, their edges perfect, as if they had been cut yesterday. My academic mind struggled to process the sheer, stunning heresy of it. This wasn't a looted tomb. It was a perfect recreation. A working Egyptian temple chamber, a holy of holies, built and hidden in the deepest recess of the Vatican. At the chamber's far end was a simple stone altar, and on it lay a collection of objects that made my heart hammer against my ribs. 4 limestone canopic jars, their stoppers carved into the heads of the 4 sons of Horus. And next to them, a set of ritual implements laid out on a linen cloth, a ceremonial adze, a serpent-headed rod, a small, feathered knife. It was a complete, perfect toolkit for the Upu Rao, the Egyptian opening of the mouth ceremony. The very ritual the early church fathers had condemned with foaming rage as the pinnacle of pagan necromancy, a demonic practice to speak with the dead. The body of the cardinal was brought in and placed on a stone slab before the altar. The chief officiant, his face now visible in the lamplight, weathered, severe, and shockingly ordinary, took up the ceremonial adze. The whispers began again, but this time they were different. They were no longer a droning chant. They were a series of sharp, forceful commands. He was reciting a litany, and as he spoke, he methodically touched the adze to the cardinal's linen-wrapped lips, eyes, and ears. "You shall see with these eyes," he whispered in a strange, bastardized form of late-period Coptic, heavy with a syntax that was far more ancient. "You shall speak with this mouth. You shall hear the names of the gods who guide you across the water." The other figures responded, their voices echoing in the chamber in a way that defied physics. The sound didn't just bounce off the walls. It was amplified by them. The basalt seemed to absorb the vibrations and release them in perfect harmony, creating overlapping frequencies that made my teeth ache and my vision swim. The chamber was a resonator box, designed to turn spoken words into physical force. The document I'd read spoke of temples built to echo human voices into power. I was standing in one. This was the secret. This was the fear. The church hadn't just banned the old magic. They had stolen it. They had studied it, mastered it, and hidden it away to use for their own. The resurrection they preached to the masses was a parable, a story of faith meant for the simple. But for their own, for the initiated elite who truly held power, it was a technology. A precise, ritualistic process for ensuring the soul's journey, not to a Christian heaven, but through the treacherous star lanes of the Egyptian underworld. They weren't praying for the cardinal's soul. They were equipping it. They were giving it back its senses, its voice, its power for a journey they clearly, actively believed was real. In that dark, humming chamber, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. For them, this wasn't heresy. This was the original doctrine. The ceremony had reached its crescendo. The air in the chamber was no longer just vibrating. It was electric, humming with a contained energy that felt like the moments before a lightning strike. The opening of the mouth was complete. The chief officiant, his face impassive and sweat beading in the lamplight, put down the ritual adze and turned to the black basalt altar. The continuous, droning chant of the hooded figures faltered and then ceased, leaving a silence so absolute it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. One of the figures stepped forward from the shadows. He moved with a reverence that bordered on fear, carrying a small, heavy-looking chest made of a dark, oily wood I couldn't identify, bound in what looked like tarnished silver. He placed it on the altar with a soft, final thud. With delicate, almost trembling fingers, he undid the ancient latch and opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of impossibly preserved linen, was the heart of the ritual. The artifact. I'd seen hundreds of heart scarabs in museums and private collections, but this was a perversion of the form. It was carved not from the usual greenstone or lapis lazuli, but from a piece of obsidian so pure and black it seemed to swallow the light, polished to a perfect, liquid sheen that reflected nothing. Intricate gold wiring, finer than a human hair, was inlaid into its surface, forming not the familiar hieroglyphs of the Book of the Dead, but a complex, almost circuit-like pattern that converged on the scarab's center. It felt simultaneously ancient and unervingly advanced. The officiant lifted the scarab from the chest with both hands, his movements slow and deliberate, as if it were immensely heavy or radiated an energy he could barely contain. He held it over the cardinal's body, his voice dropping to a near-inaudible whisper, the words now too fast, too complex for me to follow. The other figures fell utterly still, their cowled heads bowed. The only sound in the universe was his voice and the hungry crackle of the oil lamps. He slowly lowered the scarab, intending to place it directly over the cardinal's heart, the final seal on this unholy sacrament. As he did, the artifact tilted ever so slightly in his hands. The lamplight caught the smooth, flat underside for a single, fleeting, impossible moment, and I saw the symbol. My mind, trained to recognize and catalog thousands of religious and occult symbols, reeled as it struggled to process the blasphemous fusion etched into the stone. At its center was a cross, but it was not the Roman cross of the crucifixion. It was the Coptic cross, the equilateral crux ansata, the symbol of the Egyptian church. And entwined around it, consuming its own tail in an eternal unbroken loop, was an Ouroboros, the ancient Gnostic serpent, the symbol of infinity and cosmic cycles. But there was more. At the 4 points of the cross, where one might expect to see the letters INRI, were 4 tiny, perfect glyphs. The falcon, the baboon, the jackal, and the human head. The 4 sons of Horus. The divine guardians of the organs of the dead. It was the most heretical thing I had ever seen. A symbol that explicitly and undeniably merged the core iconography of Christianity with the pagan machinery of the Egyptian afterlife. This wasn't just syncretism. This was a declaration, a unified, secret doctrine. It was a statement that the crucifixion and the eternal cycle, that Christ and Horus, were 2 sides of the same coin, 2 expressions of the same underlying hidden truth, a truth they had guarded with inquisitions, with the burning of books and bodies, for 20 centuries. The officiant placed the scarab on the cardinal's chest. For a moment, I could have sworn the intricate gold wiring on its surface pulsed with a soft, internal light. A collective, soundless sigh went through the room, a release of immense tension. The ritual was complete. I had seen their holy of holies. I had seen the symbol that unwound their entire public history, the key that unlocked the great lie. And as the officiant slowly turned his gaze from the body, his ancient eyes met mine across the chamber. And I knew. I was not meant to have seen it. The silence that followed was no longer ceremonial. It was the silence of a tomb. My tomb. The ceremony was over. As if a switch had been flipped, the hooded figures began to disperse, melting back into the shadowed passages of the necropolis with a preternatural speed, leaving no sound, no trace of their passage. The body of the cardinal, now bearing its impossible obsidian artifact, was left alone in the humming silence of the Chamber of Echoes. My guide reappeared at my side, his presence a sudden, cold shock against my skin. He placed a hand on my arm, his grip firm, a silent and unbreakable command. My time in their world was over. We retraced our steps, but the journey back was a descent into a different kind of hell. The corridors no longer felt neutral. They felt menacing, alive with judgment. The strange, half-formed symbols on the walls seemed to watch me pass, their lines now sharp with accusation. The silence was no longer ceremonial. It was the predatory silence of a vault being sealed. I was a foreign body that had been permitted to see the host's inner workings, and now the antibodies were gathering to ensure the contamination would never spread. Back in the stark waiting room, the painting of Anubis Michael seemed to mock me with its open secret. Another man was waiting there. He was older, dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored suit of modern cut, but he radiated an authority so ancient it felt like gravity. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. His eyes were pale, intelligent, and impossibly weary, as if he had been watching this same sad story play out for 1,000 years. "You are a scholar of connections," he said, his English perfect, his voice calm, a surgeon's voice. "You look for the threads that bind worlds, that tie one belief to another. Tonight you were permitted to see such a thread, a fragile one that would break under the profane weight of public knowledge." He paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing me to inhabit the chasm of what he wasn't saying. "Memory is a dangerous thing, Professor," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming almost intimate. "It can be a comfort, but it can also be a weapon. The memories you have made tonight, they are not for this world. They are for the next. Do you understand?" It was not a question. It was the most elegant and terrifying threat I have ever received. An order wrapped in a philosophical veneer, a death sentence delivered as a piece of wisdom. "Forget what you saw, or we will send you to the world where such memories belong." He reached into his pocket and produced a small, heavy coin made of a dark, cold metal. He pressed it into my palm. On one side was a key, on the other a serpent. "A souvenir," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been a smile. "To remember what you must forget." I was led back to the iron gate. As it creaked open, the sounds of Rome rushed in. The scooters, the laughter, the distant sirens. A tidal wave of normalcy that felt utterly alien, a fiction. I stepped out into the night, the coin a cold weight in my pocket, a brand against my skin. I never looked back. I flew home, deleted the encrypted account, burned my notes, and tried to return to my life, but nothing was the same. Every crucifix I see now has a serpent coiled around it in my mind's eye. Every church hymn echoes with the ghost of a forbidden chant. They didn't show me the truth to enlighten me. They showed it to me to bind me, to make me a keeper of the secret by making me its prisoner. The document you sent asked what the Vatican erased and why they are still afraid. I know the answer now. They didn't erase it. They assimilated it. They practice it. They believe it. And they are afraid because in a world built on 2,000 years of a single, simple story, what happens when the world finds out that the Church's deepest, most sacred truth was stolen from a tomb on the banks of the Nile?